Chapter 1. The Boy from Marcy, Brooklyn, New York. The Marcy Houses. 6 towers of red brick stacked against the sky, home to thousands of families trying to survive. This is where the story begins. Not with a fortune, but with a fight to make it to tomorrow. On December 4th, 1969, Sean Corey Carter was born here. By the time he was 11, his father had walked out the door and didn't come back. That absence would shape everything. A boy left with questions no child should have to ask, in a neighborhood where the answers often came in the form of violence. The 1980s arrived, and with them, the crack epidemic tore through inner-city America like a wildfire. The Marcy projects were ground zero. For a teenager with no father, no money, and no clear way out, the streets offered a brutal kind of opportunity. Sean took it. He started selling drugs, moving product across state lines, sometimes to Maryland, Virginia, the places dealers called the down south runs. He would later rap about it without flinching, turning the darkest chapters of his life into verse. But make no mistake, this was not glamour. This was survival in its rawest form, in a world where a wrong word could end a life, and it nearly ended his. At 12 years old, Sean shot his own older brother in the shoulder during a dispute over jewelry, a moment of family pain he would carry for decades. He dropped out of high school. The path he was walking had only 2 destinations that everyone could see coming: prison or the grave. Friends around him fell to both. Yet inside this young man, something else was growing, a relentless hunger, a refusal to accept the ending that the world had written for him. He carried a small notebook scribbling rhymes, then he stopped writing them down at all, memorizing every line in his head, a skill that would later stun everyone who worked with him. He had a gift, sharp and undeniable. But in the late 1980s, a gift meant nothing without a door, and every door he knocked on stayed shut. Record labels weren't looking for a rapper from the Marcy projects with a criminal past and no connections. He was, in the eyes of the music industry, a nobody. But the very thing the streets had taught him, how to hustle, how to read people, how to turn nothing into something, was about to become the foundation of an empire no one could have predicted. Sean Carter didn't yet know that his greatest product would not be powder in a plastic bag. It would be himself. And the lessons he learned standing on those cold Brooklyn corners would one day be worth more than anyone in those towers could ever imagine. The boy from Marcy was about to become a brand. But first, he had to bet on himself when no one else would. Chapter 2. Selling Dreams from a Trunk. By the mid-1990s, Sean Carter had reinvented himself with a new name, Jay-Z, a nod to a mentor and to the Jay-Z subway lines that ran past Marcy. He could rap faster and sharper than almost anyone in New York. But talent wasn't translating into a contract. He hustled his way onto records, appeared on a tour, kept grinding, and still, the major labels passed. Executives didn't believe a complex, fast-spitting Brooklyn rapper could sell. So Jay-Z made a decision that would define his entire life. If no one would give him a deal, he would build his own. In 1995, alongside 2 partners, the brash entrepreneur Damon Dash and the quiet, steady Kareem Biggs Burke, Jay-Z founded Rockefeller Records. The name itself was a dare, a play on Rockefeller, the symbol of American wealth, claimed by 3 young black men from the projects who had almost nothing. They had no major distribution, no marketing budget, no safety net. What they had was product and determination. Jay-Z pressed his own records and sold them the only way he knew how, out of the trunk of his car. He drove through New York, hand to hand, building buzz one customer at a time. He approached it exactly like the corners had taught him. As he would later put it in a lyric, "I sold kilos of coke, I'm guessing I can sell CDs." The hustle was the same, only the product had changed. In 1996, Rockefeller released Jay-Z's debut album, Reasonable Doubt. It didn't explode overnight. It peaked modestly on the charts and sold steadily rather than spectacularly. But critics and the streets recognized something rare, an artist of stunning depth, but narrating the moral weight of the life he'd survived. Today, Reasonable Doubt is widely regarded as one of the greatest hip-hop albums ever made. More importantly, Jay-Z owned it. He owned the company. He owned the masters. While other artists chased advances and signed away their futures for a quick check, Jay-Z held on to the one thing the music industry rarely let artists keep: ownership. He eventually struck a distribution deal with Def Jam to get his records into stores nationwide, but the Rockefeller vision remained his. Over the next few years, the label became a powerhouse, launching careers and dominating hip-hop culture. The trunk of a car had grown into a movement, but Jay-Z was already thinking bigger than music. He had watched too many artists get rich and then go broke, squeezed by the very companies they made famous. He understood a truth most performers never grasp. The real money was never in the song. It was in the system that sold the song. And if he wanted to be more than a rapper, if he wanted to be powerful, he would have to take a risk far bigger than pressing his own CDs. He would have to bet that his name could sell something you couldn't even hear. Chapter 3: The Brand Bet. At the end of the 1990s, Jay-Z was a rising rap star, but he was watching the bigger picture, and what he saw changed his strategy forever. Fans weren't just listening to his music. They wanted to dress like him. They wanted to live like him. They wanted the lifestyle stitched into every verse. Most artists would have signed an endorsement deal, slapped their name on someone else's product and collected a check. Jay-Z and his partners refused to play that game. In 1999, they launched their own clothing line, Rocawear. Once again, the principle was ownership. They didn't want to advertise another company's brand. They wanted to build their own and keep the equity. Jay-Z did something no marketing budget could buy. He wove Rocawear directly into his lyrics and his image, turning every song and every video into a commercial nobody could skip. The brand exploded. Within a few years, Rocawear was generating hundreds of millions of dollars in annual sales, becoming a cornerstone of the booming urban fashion movement. Jay-Z had proven a radical idea. A rapper could be a fashion mogul, a cultural force whose influence translated directly into retail dollars. The young man who once sold CDs from a trunk now had his clothing on shelves across America. But this was only the blueprint. Jay-Z was learning the most valuable lesson of his career, that his name itself had become an asset, a kind of currency he could attach to almost anything. The trick was to never rent his influence when he could own a piece of what it built. This philosophy would later collide with one of the most famous boardroom standoffs in business history, but its seeds were planted here, in the world of denim and logos. He summed up his entire mindset in a single line that would become a mantra for a generation of entrepreneurs. "I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman." It wasn't bragging. It was a declaration of identity. He was no longer just a person who made products. He had become the product, the platform, and the company all at once. Every move he made now carried weight, because every move increased the value of the brand called Jay-Z. Yet beneath the rising empire, danger still lingered. The same intensity and street instincts that fueled his hustle could also pull him back toward the violence he'd come from. Success had not erased his past. It had simply raised the stakes. He was richer, more famous, and more visible than ever, which meant a single mistake could now cost him everything he'd built. Rocawear had shown the world what Jay-Z could become. But before he could ascend to true mogul status, he would face a crisis that put his freedom on the line. A night that nearly sent the future billionaire to prison and threatened to end the empire before it truly began. Chapter 4: The Night It Almost Ended. December 1999. Jay-Z was on top of the music world, riding the success of hit albums and a booming fashion brand. And then, in a single moment, it nearly all collapsed. At a record release party in a New York nightclub, a confrontation erupted. Jay-Z came to believe that a music executive named Lance Rivera had been involved in bootlegging his upcoming album, leaking and pirating his work, stealing from the empire he'd fought to build. In the chaos of that night, Rivera was stabbed. Jay-Z was accused of the attack. Suddenly, the man who had escaped the streets was staring down the very fate they'd promised him, a felony charge that could have sent him to prison for years. Everything was on the line: his freedom, his reputation, his businesses, his future. The story made headlines. The narrative wrote itself. Another rapper undone by violence, the past reaching up to drag him back down. For a man whose entire empire was built on his name and image, a prison sentence wouldn't just take his liberty. It could shatter the brand he had so carefully constructed. In 2001, Jay-Z pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor assault charge. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation. He had avoided prison by the narrowest of margins. Years later, he would speak about that night with raw honesty, calling it one of the worst moments of his life, admitting he had nearly thrown everything away in a single reckless act. He described feeling that he had betrayed himself and everything he was working to become. It was a turning point, not just legally, but personally. The crisis forced a reckoning. Jay-Z understood that the instincts that helped him survive Marcy could destroy the empire those same instincts had built. The street code and the boardroom could not coexist. To go where he wanted to go, he had to evolve or be consumed. But the legal scare wasn't his only crisis. Behind the scenes, the partnership at the heart of Rockefeller was fracturing. Jay-Z and Damon Dash, once inseparable architects of the dream, had grown apart in vision and ego. The empire they'd built from a car trunk was being pulled in 2 directions. By 2004, the tension reached its breaking point. The partners sold their remaining stake in Rockefeller Records to Def Jam, and the original brotherhood dissolved, a painful public end to the company that started it all. For many, this would have been a fall. The label split, the partnership broken, the founder nearly imprisoned. But Jay-Z saw it differently. In the very deal that ended Rockefeller as he knew it, he negotiated something extraordinary, a position no rapper had ever held before. Out of the wreckage of crisis, he was about to engineer the comeback that would transform him from a successful artist into one of the most powerful figures in the entire music industry. Chapter 5. From Artist to Empire. In 2004, as part of the deal that dissolved Rockefeller, Jay-Z was named president and CEO of Def Jam Recordings, one of the most storied labels in hip-hop history. Think about the magnitude of that. A man who, less than a decade earlier, couldn't get a single record label to sign him was now running one of the biggest labels in the world. He had crossed from the artist side of the table to the executive's chair. But Jay-Z was just getting started. In 2008, he made a move that stunned the industry. He signed a groundbreaking deal with the concert giant Live Nation, reportedly worth around $150 million, that didn't just cover his tours. It funded an entirely new company, Roc Nation, an entertainment empire spanning music, management, sports representation, and more. He was no longer building a career, he was building an institution. Then came the deal that proved his philosophy. In 2007, Rocawear, the clothing line he had launched from his own name, was sold to the Iconics brand group for $204 million. Crucially, Jay-Z kept a role in the brand's direction while collecting an enormous payday. The kid who sold CDs from a trunk had just turned a clothing label into a 9-figure fortune, and he kept stacking. Jay-Z acquired the luxury champagne brand Armand de Brignac, the gold bottles known as Ace of Spades, turning it into a cultural phenomenon. He co-founded the cognac brand Douce. He invested early in a small startup called Uber, a bet that would multiply many times over. In 2015, he bought the streaming platform Tidal for around $56 million, championing the radical idea that artists deserved ownership and fair pay for their work. Years later, in 2021, he sold a majority stake in Tidal to Square, the tech company led by Jack Dorsey, in a deal valuing the platform at roughly $297 million. That same year, he sold half of Armand de Brignac to luxury titan LVMH, the parent of Moet Hennessy, in another massive transaction. Every move followed the same gospel he'd preached since the trunk of his car. Own the asset, hold the equity, never just rent your name. In June 2019, it became official. Forbes declared Sean Carter a billionaire, the first hip-hop artist in history to reach a net worth of $1 billion. His wealth wasn't locked in a single hit record. It was spread across champagne, cognac, streaming, real estate, art, a music empire, and a portfolio of smart investments. The boy from Marcy, who once faced prison and the grave, had built a diversified fortune that would outlast any song on the charts. He had transformed himself from a performer into a mogul, from a brand into a business empire. But the most important part of his story isn't the number. It's the lesson buried inside how he got there, a lesson anyone, anywhere can learn from. Chapter 6: The Lesson in Ownership. So how did Sean Carter go from the Marcy projects to a billion-dollar empire? It's tempting to credit talent alone, and yes, he is one of the greatest lyricists who ever lived. But talent isn't the lesson. Thousands of gifted artists have made millions and lost it all. Jay-Z's true genius was a single principle he understood long before the world took him seriously: ownership. From the very beginning, when major labels rejected him, he didn't beg for a seat at someone else's table. He built his own. He owned his masters when other artists signed them away. He launched his own clothing line instead of endorsing someone else's. He created his own company, his own streaming service, his own brands. Every step, he asked the same question. Not how much will they pay me, but how much of this can I own? That distinction is everything. A paycheck ends when the work ends. Ownership keeps paying long after the spotlight fades. It's the difference between being a worker in someone else's empire and being the empire itself. Jay-Z understood that influence is an asset, and that the worst thing you can do is rent out your influence cheaply when you could own a piece of what it creates. His second great lesson was resilience. This is a man who shot his own brother as a child, who sold drugs to survive, who was rejected by every label, who nearly went to prison, who watched his founding partnership shatter in public. Any one of those moments could have been the end. Instead, each became fuel. He turned his pain into reasonable doubt. He turned his crisis into reinvention. He turned rejection into a company called Rock Nation. He refused to accept the ending the world had written for a boy from the projects. And his third lesson was diversification, the wisdom to never depend on a single source of wealth. Music made him famous, but champagne, cognac, technology, fashion, and investments made him rich beyond music. When one industry shifted, another held him up. He built a fortune that didn't rise and fall with a hit single. The numbers are staggering.